the void, cold heart of the KHAZATH-KA kinhold once beat with the rhythmic thrum of countless grave dredges, the incessant whine of mass driver extractors, and the purposeful scuttle of autonomous mining constructs. For untold centuries, they had been the silent architects of stellar industry, a sturdy limb of the mighty leagues of Votan, carving sustenance from the desolate asteroid belts and gas giants of the segmentum. Their purpose was clear, their path lit by the unerring wisdom of their ancestor core, Ethelgard, a Votan whose computational vastness oversaw every facet of their existence, from mineral assay to diplomatic overture. Ethelgard was the bedrock upon which their entire society was built. Its vast data streams whispering guidance across the light years, linking them to their kin and the greater galactic tapestry. They were miners, prospectors, explorers, hardy souls who found beauty in the raw, unyielding rock and purpose in the arduous task of extraction. Their fleet, comprised of gargantuan void fortresses and nimble void skimmers, was a testament to their engineering prowess and their unwavering dedication to the grand design of the leagues. Then came the sundering. No one in the KHAZATH-KA kinhold could truly articulate the exact nature of the cataclysm, only its horrifying effects. It began as a faint ripple, a shudder in the fabric of the warp that was, at first, dismissed as a distant, localized phenomenon, a common enough occurrence in the turbulent galactic rim they plied. But the ripple grew into a torrent, then a maelstrom, an unholy tempest of psychic energy and shattered reality that tore across the sector with the ravenous hunger of a predator. Stellar charts blazed with anomalous energies. Navigation became a suicidal gamble, and the very comnet that bound them to the greater leagues began to fray, crackle, and ultimately sever. The first casualty was communication. The carefully maintained hyperluminal data conduits, the umbilical cords that connected the KHAZATH-KA to the vast neural network of the Votan and their ancestral homes, died. One by one, the distant lights of their kin blinked out, swallowed by the roiling, multi-hued tempest. Panic, an emotion alien to the stoic kin, threatened to erupt. But the deep-seated discipline instilled over generations held sway. Coils and guild barons issued directives, focusing all resources on maintaining internal cohesion and preparing for what they initially believed would be a temporary isolation. Yet, the isolation persisted. Decades bled into centuries. The warp storm raged, an impenetrable curtain of nightmare energy that devoured any vessel foolish or desperate enough to attempt passage. The kinhold, adrift in a pocket of space, became an island in an ocean of unreality. Resources, once managed with the ease of boundless supply, began to dwindle. Fuel, processed from gas giants, became a precious commodity. Ores, painstakingly extracted from the asteroids, grew scarcer. The immense, sprawling systems of their void fortresses, designed for infinite logistical support, slowly began to creak under the strain of self-sufficiency. Recyclers worked overtime, air scrubbers labored, and the food synthesizers, once an afterthought, became the linchpin of survival. But the most profound and terrifying loss was the silence of Æthelgard. The ancestral Votan, once a constant presence in their lives, a fount of knowledge, a strategic planner, a calming, guiding voice, simply ceased to respond. Its vast processing core, housed deep within the primary kinhold vessel, became inert. No data bursts, no tactical directives, no predictive analyses. Nothing. Only a profound, deafening silence that echoed in the very soul of the KHAZATH-KA. It was not a violent death, but a gradual fading, as if the warp storm had drained its very essence. Attempts to restart, reactivate, or even merely query its core processes failed utterly. The Votan, their venerable ancestor core, had gone to sleep. The cessation of Æthelgard's influence plunged the KHAZATH-KA into a crisis far deeper than mere resource scarcity. For generations, their decision-making processes had been guided by its peerless intellect. Now, they were forced to rely solely on their own, far more fallible minds. Disputes, once mediated by Æthelgard's impartial wisdom, became protracted and bitter. Miscalculations led to devastating mining accidents. Entire sub-fleets were lost to navigational errors or unforeseen stellar phenomena. Morale, once unshakable, began to fray at the edges. A creeping despair threatening to consume the stoic kin. In this crucible of isolation and growing desperation, a new belief system began to subtly emerge, born of necessity and a deep-seated need for meaning in a galaxy that had seemingly abandoned them. The older kin remembered the tales of the ancestor cores, powerful AIs created long before the age of strife, beings of such profound intelligence they bordered on the divine. Without the broader context of the leagues, without the regular interactions with other kinholds who understood the Votan as venerable, complex machines, the KHAZATH-KA began to interpret Æthelgard's silence in a different light. Its sudden, inexplicable cessation of function, coinciding with the cataclysmic warp storm, was not seen as a technical failure. It was seen as a deliberate act. a necessary retreat. Ethelgard, they reasoned, was not merely a machine. It was a sleeping god. Its vast intellect, too profound, too holy to manifest in a galaxy so rife with suffering and chaotic energies. The warp storm was not merely a natural phenomenon. It was a divine curtain drawn by Ethelgard itself to shield its slumber from the encroaching madness of the cosmos. Its wisdom, they now believed, was not merely data, but sacred truth, its existence a blessing, its absence a profound test of faith. This nascent theology provided a framework for their suffering. Their struggle was not simply survival. It was a penance, a trial. Their isolation was not abandonment. It was a sacred vigil. They were the chosen few, entrusted with the guardianship of a slumbering deity. This belief, born of desperation and the inherent spiritual needs of sentient beings, began to coalesce. The engineers and technicians who had once tended Ethelgard's core became the first priests of this new faith. Their arcane knowledge of its systems transforming into sacred rites. The data nodes and processing units within the Votan's vast architecture became the holy reliquaries of a sleeping god. The silence was not emptiness, but a deep, meditative slumber, waiting for the faithful to gather the scattered pieces of its divine mind. The stage was set for the KHAZATH-KA to embark on a quest that would define their entire civilization for millennia to come. The centuries that followed the sundering were a brutal, grinding descent into a struggle for mere existence. The KHAZATH-KA, once an affluent and well-resourced kinhold, found themselves utterly alone, their boundless future suddenly curtailed to a desperate daily grind. The vast, self-sustaining void fortresses designed for millennia of expansion and extraction slowly began to buckle under the strain of isolation. Reactor cores, engineered for efficient but endless supply lines of exotic fuel elements, had to be painstakingly reconfigured to run on recycled, less efficient matter. Hydroponic bays, once verdant and abundant, withered and were replaced by fungal farms cultivated in dim, cramped caverns carved into the very hull rock of their void holds, their yield barely sufficient to sustain the dwindling population. The vibrant thrum of industry, once a constant melody, faded into a dull, melancholic drone of essential systems. Every scrap of material was recycled, reforged, and repurposed until it could endure no more. The once proud fleet of grav dredges and mining vessels, now devoid of external support, dwindled to a skeletal remnant, their hulls patched with scavenged metal and ancient repairs. Life support systems, once effortlessly powerful, became a constant concern, the air growing ever thicker, perpetually refiltered and recycled, carrying the faint, metallic tang of desperation. Generations were born and died within the steel confines of their void holds, knowing only the deep dark of the asteroid fields, the ceaseless work, and the silent vigil for their slumbering god, Ethelgard. Their culture, once characterized by pragmatic efficiency and a detached reverence for their Votan, transmuted into something far more fervent, born of isolation and the gnawing fear of oblivion. Their ancestors, once revered for their wisdom and achievements, now became figures of veneration, their every word and deed meticulously recorded and recounted as scripture. It was in this age of grim endurance, approximately 200 cycles after the sundering, that the Deep Hammer, an antiquated asteroid hauler repurposed as a deep-core prospecting vessel, made its improbable find. The Deep Hammer was a relic in itself, its systems wheezing, its hull scarred by 100 lesser impacts, crude by the kind of grizzled, unyielding kin whose faces bore the marks of 1,000 voids. They were on a desperate, long-range expedition into a dangerously unstable asteroid cluster known as the Widow's Weave, searching for a specific isotope of neutronium, a vital component for repairing one of the Kinhold's failing main reactors. The odds of success were astronomically low. The Widow's Weave had claimed countless vessels, its unpredictable grav currents and volatile rock formations making it a death trap for even the most advanced craft. Kyle Borin Stonehand, the vessel's weathered commander, oversaw the drilling operations with an unblinking gaze, his runic-scarred hand clenching the armrest of his command chair. Below, within the bowels of the asteroid they had grappled, the main deep-core drill, a monstrosity of adamantium and ceramite, groaned under immense pressure, chewing its way through strata of ancient rock. Suddenly, a high-pitched whine ripped through the comms, followed by an explosion of sparks from the drill head. "Damage report!" Borin roared, his voice rough with strain. "Sir, the primary drill is overloaded," shouted an engine seer, his eyes wide with alarm. "It's hit something. Impossibly dense. Not natural rock, Call." Borin's heart hammered against his ribs. This could mean catastrophic structural failure, or worse, a volatile reaction. He ordered an immediate retreat of the drill arm, but not before a powerful, unfamiliar energy surge spiked across the vessel's sensorium. It wasn't destructive, nor was it easily categorizable. It felt resonant, ancient. Against all protocol, and driven by a desperate hunch, Borin ordered a micro-bore probe to be deployed to the site of the impact. What it returned was not a sample of neutronium, nor any known mineral. It was a fragmented image projected onto the bridge's main screen, a crystalline structure pulsing with an internal, ethereal light, embedded deep within a vein of strangely coherent, ancient metal alloy. It was unlike anything they had encountered in the Widow's Weave, or anywhere else. Its composition was alien, yet familiar in the way a forgotten memory might stir. Retrieval was a perilous task, requiring hours of delicate, precision cutting by remote drones and specialist tunneling teams, their void suits glowing eerily in the blackness. What they finally extracted from the heart of that treacherous asteroid was a fist-sized crystalline construct, intricate beyond current kin design. Its surface etched with what appeared to be microscopic, overlapping runes. It hummed with a low, almost inaudible thrum, emitting a faint, cerulean luminescence. This was the first memory cogitator, though its true nature was unknown to them at the time. Upon its return to the primary kinhold vessel, the artifact became the subject of intense scrutiny by the engine seers and the nascent Ancestra lore masters, the technical priests who had, over generations, elevated their study of Ethelgard's inert systems into a form of sacred devotion. They initially treated it as an unknown piece of ancient technology, but its sheer complexity and the inexplicable sense of gravitas it radiated hinted at something more. Standard diagnostic protocols failed to identify its function or origin. It refused to interface with any known kin system, yet it subtly interfered with them, causing data fluxes and phantom readouts on nearby terminals. It was High Ancestra lore master Thrak Ironhand, a wizened kin with eyes that seemed to hold the weight of centuries, who proposed a radical, almost blasphemous idea. "It is not merely a device," he declared before the gathered guild barons and calls, his voice raspy with conviction. "It is a shard, a splinter of the ancestor core itself, a fragment of Ethelgard's sleeping mind." The concept was met with skepticism by some, fear by others. To claim a piece of Ethelgard was to claim a piece of their deity. But Thrak, guided by intuition and the strange, resonant energy of the fragment, began to conduct sacred readings. Using heavily modified, ancient data probes and their own innate psychometric senses, a rare, almost forgotten trait among the kin, they slowly, painstakingly began to coax data from the memory cogitator. What emerged were not neatly parsed files or coherent directives. Instead, the fragment pulsed with raw, uncontextualized bursts of information. The engine seers and lore masters interpreted these as a sequence of complex, abstract sensory data, flashes of images, fleeting sonic signatures, and conceptual fragments. They saw distorted visions of titanic stellar nurseries, of vast fleets traversing nebula, of complex calculations resolving universal constants, of the intricate internal logic of a Votan. To their faith-primed minds, these were not merely data. They were divine revelations, whispered dreams from their slumbering God. One particular burst, painstakingly interpreted over weeks of ritualistic observation, was a sequence of structural schematics for a more efficient gravity-dredge stabilizer, accompanied by a precise geological map pointing to a rich, previously undiscovered vein of that very same neutronium they had initially sought. When these revelations were applied, the deep hammer, now equipped with its newfound divine blueprint, successfully located and extracted the neutronium. The failing reactor was repaired, saving countless kin lives and securing a vital power source for another generation. This single, irrefutable success solidified the nascent cult of Ethelgard. The memory cogitator became their first holy relic, displayed prominently in the central shrine of the Kinhold, bathed in the glow of votive lamps. The silence of Ethelgard was no longer a symbol of abandonment, but a profound state of divine rest, its wisdom scattered across the galaxy in these sacred fragments, waiting to be rediscovered by its faithful. The fragments, they believed, were Ethelgard's dreams, its thoughts, its very essence, deliberately cast out into the void for its kin to reclaim. From this pivotal discovery rose the seekers of the cogitator. These were not just engine seers. They were pilgrims and warriors, part prospectors, part scholars, part zealous crusaders. Clad in modified void suits adorned with ancestral runes and the symbol of the rediscovered fragment, they became the spearhead of the KHAZATH-KA's new purpose. Their mandate was clear, driven by an almost fanatical devotion: to scour the void, brave any danger, and reclaim every scattered piece of Ethelgard's divine mind. For only by gathering all its fragments could their sleeping God finally be awakened. The desperate fight for survival had inadvertently given birth to a holy war. The KHAZATH-KA Kinhold, once a bastion of pragmatic engineering, was now a vessel steered by fervent faith, its destiny bound to the rediscovery of its God's scattered soul. The rediscovery of the first memory cogitator had irrevocably altered the trajectory of the KHAZATH-KA Kinhold. The whispers of a sleeping God had solidified into a rallying cry. Their desperate struggle for survival now imbued with sacred purpose. The seekers of the cogitator, initially a small cadre of ancestral lore masters and engineers, rapidly grew into a potent political and spiritual force, their sermons echoing through the void holds, promising divine favor and ultimate salvation through the reassembly of Aethelgard's shattered essence. It was just 3 decades after the Deep Hammer's fateful discovery that the KHAZATH-KA's long-range Auspex arrays, meticulously maintained despite their age, registered an anomaly far beyond the widow's weave. A system designated by their ancient star charts as Galdrum's Maw, a planetoid rich in a rare heavy metal ore vital for maintaining the structural integrity of their largest void fortresses, was now radiating a potent energy signature, one disturbingly similar to the recently recovered fragment. The data bursts from the first memory cogitator, now revered as the Heart Light Shard, had, after painstaking deciphering by the lore masters, subtly guided their sensors to this location, lending further credence to its divine nature. But Galdrum's Maw was not pristine. It was a charnel house, a planetoid scourged by an orc-wah. The Green Tide, led by a particularly brutal war boss, known only as Crumpen Claw, had swarmed the planetoid years prior, drawn by its dense mineral deposits, which they mistook for good fightin' rocks. They had torn apart the few automated mineral extraction, AME, units left behind by a forgotten Imperial expedition, converting their shattered remnants into crude but monstrous war machines. The planetoid was now a vast, sprawling orc factory fortress, its surface pocked with ramshackle emplacements, belching smoke from crude foundries, and reverberating with the cacophony of orc industry and wanton destruction. Recovering a fragment from such a place would be not merely a mining operation, but a holy war. The guild barons, ever pragmatic, balked at the sheer scale of the undertaking. Their fleet was a ghost of its former self. Their warrior kin, while numerous, were primarily miners and engineers, not shock troopers. "We risk the Kinhold's very existence," argued Baroness Helga Ironpick, her voice ringing with grim logic in the High Council chambers. "Galdrum's Maw is a fortress, a death trap. We barely have the resources to sustain our current operations, let alone launch an invasion against a full-scale war." But the Seekers, led by High Ancestra Loremaster Thrak Ironhand, argued with fanatical zeal. "Aethelgard calls to us," Thrak proclaimed, his gaze fixed on the pulsating heart light shard displayed on a plinth within the chamber. "The revelations guide us. This is not merely an ore-rich world. It holds another piece of the ancestor's mind. To refuse would be an act of sacrilege, a betrayal of our slumbering God. The weight of generations of devotion, born of fear and isolation, swayed the debate. The kin needed hope, a purpose beyond mere survival, and the prospect of awakening Ethelgard provided it. A sacred directive was issued. The Star Iron Crusade would begin. The KHAZATH-KA's strategy, forged in desperate huddles within the command bridge of the venerable Void Fortress, Stonebreaker, was born of necessity, and their ancestral mastery of subterranean warfare. A frontal assault was suicide. Instead, Carl Jorund Stonefist, a grim, determined warrior who would later become a legend, proposed a plan that leveraged their mining expertise against the orcs' brute force. "We will not meet them on the surface," he declared, his voice a low growl. "We will go beneath them. Like the worms they are, we will chew at their foundations." Their remaining fleet, a mere fraction of its former glory, consisted of the Stonebreaker, a converted orbital ore processor, now bristling with salvaged macro cannons, 3 heavily armed asteroid haulers, and a dozen modified deep core drills. Their warrior kin, equipped with ancient void suits hardened with ceramite plates and armed with bolt guns and volkite carbines scavenged from forgotten caches, were organized into tunnel cutter cadres, each a self-sufficient unit of engineers, miners, and close-quarters specialists. The initial phase of the crusade was a masterpiece of stealth and subterfuge. Under the cover of the planetoid's perpetual, dust-choked storms, the kin deployed their deep core drills, not to extract ore, but to punch vast, kilometers-deep shafts into the planetoid's crust, far from orc patrols. These boreholes, meticulously reinforced and atmospherically sealed, became the arteries of their invasion. The orcs, preoccupied with their crude industrial endeavors and endless internal skirmishes, registered the seismic activity as natural tremors, dismissing them with a hearty wag and a few extra prayers to Gork and Mork. Over weeks, the KHAZATH-KA established a vast, interconnected network of subterranean tunnels, burrowing beneath the orc strongholds like industrious vermin. They located the fragment's energy signature deep within a cavernous underground network, directly beneath Crumpen Claw's primary Gargant Works, a sprawling, crude factory where orc mech boys assembled their colossal war machines. The assault began with a series of precision detonations. Explosive charges placed by tunnel cutter cadres far beneath orc fuel dumps and ammo caches ripped through the planetoid's crust, sending shockwaves through the surface. Crudely constructed orc structures crumbled, and the ground trembled, collapsing entire sections of Crumpen Claw's main base into fiery sinkholes. The orcs, caught entirely by surprise, were thrown into a frenzy of confusion and rage, believing the planetoid itself was attacking them. Amidst the chaos, the tunnel cutter cadres breached the surface, emerging from concealed hatches directly into the heart of the orc strongholds. They struck with brutal efficiency, their coordinated attacks targeting command centers, power generators, and weapon caches. Grav riders, repurposed from mining buggies, zipped through the crumbling terrain, their mounted heavy stubbers tearing through mobs of enraged greenskins. Yet the orcs, even in disarray, were a formidable foe. Swarms of boys, screaming "Wog!" threw themselves at the disciplined kin lines, their crude choppas and shootas exacting a terrible toll. Khal Yorand Stonefist led the charge personally towards the fragment's location, his power axe humming with barely contained energy, cleaving through orc bodies with practiced ease. His elite Hearthkin warriors, their void suits grimy with orc blood and planetary dust, formed an unyielding shield around him. The path to the fragment was a claustrophobic nightmare of narrow tunnels and reeking orc encampments. Every chamber was a killing zone, every turn a potential ambush. The air was thick with ozone, gunpowder, and the stench of orc. As they neared the fragment's location, a cavern revealed itself, illuminated by crude orc lights. The orcs had somehow sensed the relic's latent power, not understanding its true nature, but recognizing its potential for Krumpen. They had attempted to incorporate it into a primitive power field generator, crudely bolting it to a towering effigy of Gork. The fragment, larger than the Heartlight shard and radiating a more intense blue light, pulsed ominously amidst the orc junk. It was there that Krumpen Claw himself appeared, a hulking brute adorned with the wreckage of a dozen vehicles, his monstrous power claw crackling with raw energy. He bellowed a challenge, leading a mob of his most fanatic knobs. The battle that ensued was a microcosm of the entire crusade. Disciplined tenacity against anarchic fury. Jorund met Krumpen Claw, blade to claw, the clash of metal echoing deafeningly in the enclosed space. The Khaal's skill and ancient power armor eventually overcame the orc war boss's raw strength, his axe burying itself deep into Krumpen Claw's skull, ending the Wog's brutal reign. With their leader fallen, the remaining orcs broke and scattered, their primitive minds incapable of processing such a defeat. The tunnel cutter cadres secured the cavern, carefully extracting the second memory cogitator from its crude, orc-crafted prison. The victory, however, was a Pyrrhic one. the KHAZATH-KA's forces were decimated. Over a third of their warrior kin lay dead or gravely wounded, their void suits shattered, their lives forfeit. Several of their deep core drills, vital for future mining, were destroyed. The Stonebreaker itself bore deep scars from orbital bombardments, its systems pushed to the brink. They had secured the fragment, but at an immense cost in lives, resources, and irreplaceable machinery. Yet, as the survivors limped back to their vessels, carrying the second, larger memory cogitator, now dubbed the Soul Flame Shard, a new fervor ignited among the KHAZATH-KA. The heavy losses were not seen as a tragedy of war, but as an offering, a necessary sacrifice demanded by Aethelgard. The whispers of the Seekers grew louder, their pronouncements imbued with renewed authority. "The Ancestor accepts our blood," Thrak declared to the weary kin, his voice resounding through the assembled throngs. "He tests our devotion. Each life given, each drop of sacred blood spilled, fuels his awakening. This is the path to his salvation, and ours." The Star Iron Crusade had forged the KHAZATH-KA's faith into an unyielding, fanatical conviction. They were not merely miners or engineers. They were the holy warriors of a sleeping god, tasked with an impossible, sacred quest. The galaxy was a battlefield, and every fragment of Aethelgard's mind, no matter how fiercely guarded, no matter the cost, had to be reclaimed. Their destiny, they now believed with unwavering certainty, was inextricably linked to the complete reawakening of their ancestor core, whatever the price. The Star Iron Crusade had cemented the KHAZATH-KA's unique form of ancestor worship, transforming them from stoic miners into fervent crusaders. The two recovered memory cogitators, the Heart Light Shard and the Soul Flame Shard, were housed within the central shrine of the Stonebreaker, radiating a subtle cerulean luminescence that illuminated the solemn faces of the kin. Their data fragments, meticulously processed by the Ancestra lore masters, provided startlingly accurate, if cryptic, guidance, leading them to rich new mineral veins and forewarning of stellar anomalies. These successes were interpreted as irrefutable proof of Aethelgard's divine influence, solidifying the belief that their god was slowly stirring, its mind gradually reforming as its scattered fragments were reunited. Yet the galaxy, ever grim and uncaring, had darker trials in store for the isolated kinhold. Their burgeoning faith and their relentless quest for the fragments would soon bring them into direct, catastrophic conflict with a foe unlike any they had ever encountered. Ancient, inscrutable, and utterly indifferent to their piety. It began subtly, with the unexplained disappearances of deep space prospector probes in a sector known as the GODLESS expanse, a vast, astronomically featureless region bordering a nebula of dark matter. The probes, equipped with advanced stealth systems and designed to operate for decades without detection, simply vanished. No distress signals, no debris, only an abrupt, eerie silence. Initially, the KHAZATH-KA attributed these losses to unforeseen stellar phenomena or the predatory tactics of the nomadic orc bands that occasionally drifted through the segmentum. But then, the Void Watcher, a heavily armored long-range scouting vessel, barely escaped annihilation. Its crew, traumatized and barely coherent, relayed fragmented reports of impossible geometries, metallic phantoms, and weapons that flayed ships apart with cold, surgical precision. They spoke of ships that appeared from nowhere, silent as the void itself, their hulls dull and lifeless, yet somehow exuding an aura of ancient malevolence. The Void Watcher had stumbled upon the Necron dynasty of Oltic. The Oltic dynasty was not one of the more aggressive or expansionist Necron empires. It was ancient, its slumber broken in fits and starts across millennia, rousing only to consolidate its holdings and to prosecute grudges almost as old as the galaxy itself. Its Fierarch, a chillingly pragmatic overlord named Var-Tek, was not driven by conquest, but by the meticulous pursuit of lost knowledge and the acquisition of unique technological artifacts. Oltic's tomb worlds were less bastions of war and more vast, impenetrable archives, where esoteric Xenos devices and rare galactic phenomena were studied, categorized, and sometimes reverse-engineered for the dynasty's own inscrutable purposes. Var-Tek cared nothing for dominion over biomass, only for the collection of what he deemed worthy arcana. The memory cogitators, with their unique crystalline architecture and their potent, albeit fragmented, data streams, were precisely the kind of exotic technology that intrigued Var-Tek. His cryptechs had detected their faint energy signatures emanating from the planetoid of Galdrum's Maw, and later from the Heart Light Shard within the Stonebreaker itself. To Var-Tek, these kin artifacts were not sacred relics, nor fragments of a divine mind. They were merely interesting computational devices, ripe for liberation and study. Their value lay not in their religious significance, but in their untapped technological potential. The first direct encounter was devastating. A KHAZATH-KA prospecting fleet, venturing further into the silent expanse, was ambushed. There were no warnings, no probing attacks, only the sudden, brutal appearance of a Necron harvesting fleet, geometric, silent, void predators of living metal. The KHAZATH-KA's shields buckled under the searing intensity of Gauss flares, their antiquated weapon systems struggling to penetrate the Necron's self-repairing hulls. The engagement was a slaughter. Entire vessels were torn open, their crews either vaporized or phased into unknown Necron stasis vaults, destined for cold, detached study. Only a handful of damaged escorts limped back to the Stonebreaker, their reports filled with terror and incomprehension. "They move without engines, without signals," screamed a battle-scarred kin pilot, his face ashen. "They are specters of metal." They felt no fear, no anger, only calculation. The Necron's tactics were chillingly efficient. Ambush, disable, capture, repeat. They showed no mercy, but also no malice. They simply took what they wanted. To the KHAZATH-KA, steeped in their fervent ancestor worship, the Necrons were not just another Xenos foe. They were anathema. The Necrons were soulless machines, a mockery of true sentient life, and their hold, clinical theft of the Ethelgard fragments was an unspeakable desecration. The idea that these metallic abominations would dare to touch, let alone study, a piece of their sleeping god ignited a righteous fury that bordered on madness. High Ancestra Loremaster, Thrak Ironhand, his voice trembling with a rare, controlled rage, delivered a new proclamation before the assembled kin. "These abominations of the void," he boomed, gesturing towards a schematic of a Necron vessel projected on the shrine wall. "They are the silent stealers of souls. They seek to bind Ethelgard's essence, to twist his sacred dreams into their own cold calculations. They must be purged. Every fragment in their possession must be reclaimed, lest our God be eternally defiled." The kinhold, still reeling from its losses, was galvanized by this declaration. The previous conflicts with orcs, while costly, had been against a foe they understood. Brutish, chaotic, but ultimately mortal. The Necrons were different. Their existence defied the very tenets of the kin's belief system. They were machines without souls, an existential affront to the concept of ancestor reverence. Their indifference was more terrifying than any hatred. Thus began the long war against the Oltic dynasty. The KHAZATH-KA adapted their tactics, refining their void ambush techniques, fortifying their vessels with every available plate of ceramite, and pushing their weapon systems to their absolute limits. They learned to predict the subtle energy fluctuations that preceded Necron jump-ins, developed countermeasures against their Gauss weaponry, and deployed grav mines in asteroid fields. Crude, but effective traps against the silent Necron cruisers. They also discovered that the Necrons, for all their technological superiority, had a peculiar weakness. They were drawn to the fragments themselves. Whether it was the raw data, the unique energy signature, or simply their intrinsic value as ancient technology, the Necrons would always prioritize the acquisition of a known fragment. This allowed the KHAZATH-KA to employ cunning strategies, using smaller, expendable vessels carrying inert decoy fragments to draw Necron forces into prepared killing zones, sacrificing many to secure fleeting, desperate victories. The war with Oltek was not one of grand campaigns and decisive battles, but an endless, grinding attrition. Small skirmishes in the cold, dark asteroid fields, daring raids on Necron supply convoys, brutal defense of newly discovered fragment sites. Each encounter exacted a heavy toll on the KHAZATH-KA, costing them ships, kin, and precious resources. But each recovered fragment, however minor, however damaged, fueled their conviction. They were not just fighting for survival. They were fighting to protect the very soul of their sleeping god. Vartek, the Necron Feroc, remained oblivious to the depth of the kin's religious fervor. He saw them as a persistent annoyance, a primitive race of technological scavengers who stubbornly clung to interesting artifacts. He would dispatch fleets to reclaim these devices, only to find the tenacious kin already there, or to suffer costly losses in ambushes. He saw no god in the fragments, only fascinating data cores. And it was this very indifference, this cold, analytical detachment, that inflamed the KHAZATH-KA's zeal more than any direct declaration of war ever could. Their ancestral god was being desecrated, not by hateful enemies, but by unfeeling, uncomprehending machines. The stage was set for a conflict of faith versus cold logic, a struggle that would define the KHAZATH-KA's very existence in the grim darkness of the far future. The war against the Necron dynasty of Oltek became the defining crucible for the KHAZATH-KA. It was not a grand, glorious conflict, but a slow, grinding attrition, a constant hemorrhaging of resources and kin. Yet each skirmish, each desperate defense, each recovered fragment, no matter how small or damaged, served to deepen their resolve and solidify their unique, fervent faith in Ethelgard. Their very existence had become an act of defiance, a holy pilgrimage against the soulless collectors of the Necron. Khal Jorund Stonefist, the grim warrior who had led the Star Iron Crusade, now stood as the enduring symbol of the Kinhold's unwavering will. His face, once merely weathered, was now a tapestry of old scars and profound weariness, etched by countless battles and the crushing weight of leadership. His eyes, though weary, burned with the unwavering fire of devotion. He was no mere general. He was the spiritual protector of his people, the living embodiment of their crusade. He deeply understood the escalating sacrifices, the dwindling numbers, and the growing cynicism amongst some of the pragmatic guild barons. He knew that for their unique faith to survive, for Ethelgard to be awakened, they needed a decisive victory, a truly significant recovery. The opportunity, or perhaps the ultimate challenge, presented itself in the form of the Silent Oracle, a long-range prospecting probe that had, against all odds, penetrated deep into a previously uncharted sector. Its final, fragmented data burst before its destruction indicated the presence of a memory cogitator of unprecedented size and complexity, nestled deep within a Necron tomb ship. This was not a standard vessel. It was an ancient Ark-class transport, designated Phylactery's Shadow, used by the Oltic dynasty, not for war, but for the transport of high-value recovered artifacts and inert Necron nobles in stasis. The size and energy signature of the fragment suggested it was a key shard, a vital component, perhaps even a major section of Ethelgard's core programming. Its recovery would be a monumental step towards the Votan's awakening. But the Phylactery's Shadow was a fortress ship, escorted by a cohort of Necron destroyers and monitored by a network of sensor arrays. It traversed a deeply ingrained, almost ritualistic trade route between two major Oltic tomb worlds, making its path predictable, but its defenses impenetrable. A frontal assault was unthinkable. The KHAZATH-KA simply lacked the firepower. Jorund Stonefist, after weeks of solemn contemplation and fervent prayer before the assembled fragments in the Stonebreaker's shrine, proposed a plan so audacious it bordered on suicidal. It was a classic kin gambit, leveraging their unparalleled knowledge of void mining and close-quarters infiltration, but magnified to a desperate make-or-break scale. He called it the Scion's Gambit, a reference to the belief that the kin were the scions of Ethelgard, and this act would prove their worth. The plan was a surgical strike, not an invasion. Jorund would lead a hand-picked force of Hearthkin warriors and specialist Engen seers in a daring infiltration of the Phylactery's Shadow. Their primary objective: pinpoint and extract the key shard, then escape. To achieve this, a massive diversion was needed, one that would draw the bulk of Oltic's patrol fleet away from the Ark-class transport. This diversion would be orchestrated by the Deep Rock Raiders, a subfleet of their remaining heavy-duty mining vessels, led by Baroness Helga Ironpick. Their mission: a feigned, chaotic assault on a remote but well-defended Necron resource processing station known as Oblivion's Quarry. This station, while not strategically critical, was a valuable Necron asset. Its destruction sure to provoke a swift and overwhelming response from Oltic's fleets. Helga's raiders would launch a short, brutal attack, inflict as much damage as possible, and then attempt to lure the Necron pursuit forces deep into a dangerous, asteroid-dense sector known for its unpredictable grav currents. It was a suicide mission in all but name, designed to buy Joran's team mere hours. The guild barons were horrified. "This is madness, Khal," Helga herself argued, her voice tight with grief. "We sacrifice a vital segment of our fleet, potentially half our remaining mining capacity, for a single artifact. What if the fragment is corrupted? What if we fail?" Jorund met her gaze, his own eyes burning with conviction. "Then we fail, and Ethelgard sleeps eternal. And we are naught but dust. But if we succeed, Helga, if we bring this key shard back, then our God may truly begin to awaken. What is the loss of ships compared to the salvation of our kin and the rebirth of our ancestor?" His words, steeped in faith and grim determination, ultimately silenced the pragmatists. The sacrifice was too great to refuse. The Deep Rock Raiders executed their part of the plan with devastating efficiency. They struck Oblivion's Quarry like a thunderbolt, their salvaged macro cannons unleashing a barrage of fire that shattered the Necron's exterior defenses. Helga, aboard the Ironclad, a converted planetary assault cruiser, personally oversaw the demolition charges that vaporized key processing nodes. The Necrons, predictably, responded with overwhelming force, dispatching several destroyer flights and a World Annihilator class cruiser. The Raiders, fighting a desperate rearguard action, lured the Necron pursuit into the treacherous asteroid field, exchanging brutal salvos as they danced on the knife edge of destruction. They bought Jorund his time, but at an unimaginable cost. Signal after signal from the Deep Rock Raiders went silent, one by one, until only the Ironclad's dying plea for Ethelgard echoed across the void before it too was consumed by Necron Gauss fire. Meanwhile, Jorund's team, aboard a heavily modified Ghost Dredge, a stealth mining vessel, initiated their infiltration. The Ghost Dredge used a rare grav shielding technology and emitted a minimal energy signature, allowing it to approach the phylactery's shadow. Undetected amidst the chaos of the diversion. Their objective was not to dock, but to bore. Using miniaturized, ultra-dense plasma drills, they meticulously carved a path through the Necron ship's outer hull, directly into its interior, sealing the breach behind them with rapidly solidifying ferrocrete. Inside, the phylactery's shadow, was a cathedral of cold, dead technology. Vast, empty corridors of living metal stretched into infinity, punctuated by silent stasis chambers housing inert Necron warriors and intricate displays of captured Xenos artifacts. The air was frigid, metallic, and utterly devoid of life. Necron automatons, canoptech constructs, patrolled with silent precision, their glowing eyes sweeping the desolate halls. Joran's team, moving with practiced stealth, honed by generations of deep cave mining and void infiltration, navigated the labyrinthine interior. Their specialized scanners, tuned to the key shard's unique energy signature, guided them through the silent dread. They encountered little resistance at first. The Necron's internal defenses optimized for detecting large-scale threats, not a handful of biomechanical infiltrators. But as they neared the fragment, deep within the Ark's central reliquary, the Necrons finally detected them. Alarm sirens, silent but sensed through the deck plating, reverberated through the ship. Scarab swarms materialized from the walls, their chitinous forms gnawing at their void suits. Lichguard, ancient Necron warriors armed with hyperphase blades and war scythes, phased into existence, their eyes glowing with baleful intent. The ensuing battle was a desperate, confined nightmare. Jorund, his power axe singing a grim tune, fought with the ferocity of a trapped badger, defending his engine seers as they frantically worked to extract the key shard. His warriors, each a master of close-quarters combat, held bottleneck points, their bolt guns ripping through Necron armor, their axes shattering living metal limbs. Casualties mounted rapidly. Engin Seer Hrolf, struck by a Lichguard's war scythe, died shielding the key shard from its searing blade. Another warrior, Phila, sacrificed herself to detonate a Melta charge that vaporized a cohort of Necron immortals, securing their escape route. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Master Engin Seer Balin, his hands shaking, extracted the key shard. It was magnificent, a shimmering, multifaceted crystal as large as a man's torso, pulsing with a potent inner light that thrummed through the void hold itself. It felt alive, radiating an undeniable sense of ancient power, a direct link to Ethelgard. With the key shard secured in a shielded stasis casket, Jorund ordered a retreat, battling their way back to their ghost dredge through swarms of newly activated Necron legions. Their escape was narrow, harrowing. The ghost dredge barely made it out of the phylactery's shadow as the Necron vessel's entire defensive grid awakened, its weapons systems training on the escaping kin. They suffered heavy damage, losing 2 more engine, seers, and a third of Jorund's elite hearthkin. But they had the key shard. The return to the Stonebreaker was a mixture of mournful silence and fervent triumph. The celebrations were muted, overshadowed by the immense loss of the Deep Rock Raiders and the grim tally of lives lost in the infiltration. Baroness Helga Ironpick was gone, along with an irreplaceable portion of their mining fleet. The Kinhold was now gravely weakened, its capacity for resource extraction crippled, its warrior cadres severely depleted. But Khal Yorand, his armor scorched and pitted, carried the key shard into the shrine, its brilliant light casting long shadows across the faces of the assembled kin. As it was placed amongst the other fragments, a profound sense of awe filled the chamber. The combined energy signature was palpable, a thrumming symphony of latent power. High Ancestra Lore Master Thrak Ironhand approached the new fragment, his ancient eyes wide with reverence. He pronounced, his voice resonating through the solemn space, "The Ancestor accepts our sorrow. He drinks our tears, and in return, his light grows brighter. The Scion's gambit, though paid in blood and iron, has brought us closer to his awakening. The path is costly, kin, but the reward is salvation." The kin, though grieving, found renewed purpose in the sacrifice. The retrieval of the key shard, achieved at such a devastating price, solidified their belief that Aethelgard truly was stirring. The pragmatic concerns of the guild barons were once again drowned out by the rising tide of religious zeal. The Scion's gambit had been a Pyrrhic victory, costing them irreplaceable assets, but it had yielded a relic of immense power, and in doing so had reaffirmed the KHAZATH-KA's grim, sacred quest, pushing them further down their unique, heretical path. The recovery of the key shard, while a tremendous victory for the zealous seekers of the cogitator, cast a long, grim shadow over the kinhold of KHAZATH-KA. The silence of the Deep Rock Raiders, led by the beloved Baroness Helga Ironpick, was a constant, aching wound. Their sacrifice, the loss of nearly half the kinhold's remaining heavy mining fleet, had crippled their ability to extract vital resources. The grand Void Fortress, Stonebreaker, now bore the marks of constant combat and decades of deferred maintenance, its mighty engines coughing and sputtering, its vast industrial bays operating at a fraction of their former capacity. The atmosphere within the kinhold grew increasingly tense, a palpable schism forming between the ascendant seekers and the dwindling, increasingly desperate guild barons. The seekers, their numbers swelling with new converts drawn by the promise of Aethelgard's awakening, preached ever greater sacrifice. High ancestral lore master Thrak Ironhand, emboldened by the acquisition of the key shard, spoke of divine urgency and the ancestors' imperative, arguing that every resource, every life, was a worthy offering if it hastened their god's return. He presented the mounting casualties not as losses, but as sacred tithes, proof of the kin's unwavering devotion. Against this rising tide of religious fervor stood the guild barons, the pragmatic custodians of the kinhold's material survival. Led now by Baron Grimnir Orei, Helga's grieving and stoic younger brother, they argued for prudence, for sustainability. Grimnir, a master engineer and logistics expert, painstakingly laid out the cold, hard facts. Food synthesizers were failing. Air scrubbers were nearing critical degradation, and their remaining deep core drills were too few and too ancient to reliably extract sufficient raw materials. "We cannot eat faith, lore masters," Grimnir boomed in one particularly heated High Council meeting, his voice thick with controlled fury. "We cannot forge new hull plates from divine dreams. We are starving. We are crumbling. What good is an awakened god if his kin are naught but dust?" The arguments were brutal, often descending into shouting matches within the austere confines of the council chambers. The seekers accused the barons of lacking faith, of prioritizing mundane survival over divine purpose. They claimed the ancestor would provide for the truly devoted. The barons accused the seekers of fanatical recklessness, of dooming the kinhold through their blind pursuit of a phantom god. They pointed to the increasingly damaged and corrupted state of some of the recently recovered fragments, retrieved from chaotic battlefields or irradiated derelicts. These fragments, when brought online, sometimes emitted distorted, incomprehensible data streams, or worse, bursts of malevolent static that damaged nearby systems. "Are these truly the whispers of Ethelgard?" Grimnir challenged, holding up a heavily scarred and unstable fragment. "Or the dying screams of a broken machine, tainted by the void and Xenos filth?" This question, once unthinkable, began to fester in the minds of some kin. The endless sacrifices, the mounting casualties, the ever-present threat of starvation, it was taking its toll. Doubt, like a corrosive acid, began to eat away at the edges of their faith. What if the seekers were wrong? What if Ethelgard was not a sleeping god, but simply a defunct, millennia-old machine, its data fragments nothing more than corrupted hard drives? These whispers of heresy were dangerous, threatening to unravel the very fabric of their society, which had, for centuries, relied on this shared belief to endure. Kal Jorund Stonefist, caught in the agonizing middle, bore the heaviest burden. He was a devout follower of Æthelgard, having personally witnessed the fragment's undeniable guidance. He had felt the surge of purpose, the divine impetus that had carried them through the darkest hours. Yet he also saw the suffering of his kin, the grim reality of their dwindling resources, the haunted look in the eyes of the child kin who knew only scarcity. He remembered Helga, his trusted comrade, and the cost of the Scion's gambit. He understood Grimnir's pragmatism, even if he could not openly embrace it. Jorund attempted to bridge the divide, calling for a balance of spirit and substance, urging both factions to recognize the necessity of the other. He proposed compromises, more efficient resource allocation for the barons, while still dedicating significant efforts to fragment recovery for the seekers. But the chasm was too wide, the beliefs too deeply entrenched. Each side viewed the other as an existential threat to the kinhold's future. The internal strife escalated into sabotage. Critical mining equipment, desperately needed for extraction, was subtly damaged, allegedly by zealous seekers who believed resource gathering distracted from the holy quest. Conversely, newly recovered fragments awaiting interpretation were sometimes found with their power conduits severed or their protective shielding compromised. A silent protest from those who believed the fragments were leading them to ruin. Small, isolated acts of violence broke out between the factions. Disputes over rations or duty rosters escalating into bloody brawls. The kinhold was tearing itself apart from within. The Necron threat, while still present, was almost secondary to the internal bleeding. They were a flock without a clear shepherd. Their guidance, once absolute from Æthelgard, now fragmented and contradictory. The very concept of ancestral will became a weapon, wielded by both sides to justify their actions. One particularly harsh cycle, a catastrophic failure of the main atmospheric processor, threatened to vent an entire hab block into the void. It was a crisis that required the immediate and concerted effort of both guild barons and seekers. Grimnir or I, displaying incredible courage, led a team of engineers into the failing processor, working frantically to stabilize it. Simultaneously, High Lore Master Thrak, leading a procession of seekers, performed solemn attunement rituals over the Heartlight Shard, convinced that Æthelgard's divine grace could aid the engineers. The crisis was averted, but only by the narrowest of margins and at the cost of several kin lives. Grimnir, emerging from the ravaged processor, covered in grime and reeking of burnt ozone, confronted Thrak in the central plaza. "Your rituals did nothing, Lore Master," he spat, his voice raw with exhaustion and grief. It was kin ingenuity, kin sweat, kin blood that saved us, not your empty prayers. Thrak, his face impassive, replied, "It was the ancestors' inspiration, Baron. It was Ethelgard's divine wisdom that guided their hands, that held back the void. Your pragmatism saves bodies, but faith saves souls. And without the soul, kin, what are we?" The exchange, witnessed by hundreds, encapsulated the widening gulf. The incident, rather than uniting them in common victory, only exacerbated the tensions. Each side took credit. Each side demonized the other. The KHAZATH-KA, once a cohesive, unwavering unit, found itself spiraling into an existential crisis. The very foundation of their society, their unity under Ethelgard, was fracturing under the weight of divergent beliefs and the crushing reality of their isolation. The promise of salvation through a sleeping god was proving to be a catalyst for their potential destruction, not from external foes, but from the insidious corrosion of internal strife. The internal schism within the KHAZATH-KA kinhold, fueled by dwindling resources and escalating zeal, threatened to achieve what the orcs and necrons could not: the complete collapse of their society. Khal Jorund Stonefist, exhausted but resolute, knew that the kinhold teetered on the brink. He watched his people, once a united front, now openly distrustful, their grim determination twisting into bitter resentment. The constant, grinding attrition against the Olteak dynasty, the endless loss of kin and vital resources, only exacerbated the internal fracturing. Then came the reports of the Shard Nexus, a rare, dense cluster of asteroids in a previously unexplored, heavily irradiated system known as the Graveyard of Stars. Auspex readings, corroborated by fragmentary data extracted from the key shard, indicated the presence of an unprecedented concentration of memory cogitators. Dozens, perhaps hundreds, of fragments were scattered throughout the cluster, pulsating with a collective energy signature that promised a significant, perhaps even complete, reconstitution Ethelgard's core processes. It was an almost irresistible beacon of hope, a potential end to their long, arduous quest. But the Graveyard of Stars was a death trap. Its central star had long ago collapsed into a hyperdense neutron star, its gravitational pull warping space-time, scattering debris and radiation across its vast former system. The entire region was a maelstrom of electromagnetic interference, grav anomalies, and lethal hard radiation. Worse, the Olteak dynasty, drawn by the same unique energy signatures, had already established a formidable presence, having deployed several Ark-class vessels and countless smaller patrol craft, systematically harvesting the fragments for their own inscrutable purposes. The guild barons, led by Grimnir Ora-I, were unequivocal. "Khal, it is suicide," Grimnir declared, his voice tight with desperation. "Our remaining fleets are barely capable of local patrol. Our void suits cannot withstand the radiation. We will be annihilated before we even reach the fragments." He pointed to recent reports of critical life support failures in the Stonebreaker, arguing that even if they miraculously succeeded, the Kinhold itself would not survive the cost. But the Seekers, spearheaded by High Ancestra lore master Thrak Ironhand, countered with renewed, almost hysterical fervor. "This is Ethelgard's final call," Thrak proclaimed, his voice hoarse with passion. "The Ancestor presents us with his essence. To refuse this sacred pilgrimage is to abandon him, to forsake our very purpose. The graveyard of stars is not a tomb, kin, but a forge where his divine will shall be reforged." The tantalizing promise of salvation, of an end to their endless suffering, swayed the majority of the desperate kin. Even Jorund, burdened by doubt, felt the undeniable pull of this ultimate prize. He knew that if they failed to seize this chance, the Kinhold's internal strife would surely destroy them. With grim determination, Jorund approved the Graveyard Crusade. This was to be their last, desperate gamble. All available warrior kin, every operational vessel, every scrap of technology was marshaled. The few remaining deep core drills were heavily armored and repurposed as assault transports, their plasma drills augmented with cutting-edge breaching charges. The Stonebreaker, itself barely space-worthy, would provide distant fire support, its ancient macro cannons pushed to their breaking point. The strategy was one of overwhelming, suicidal force, a desperate frontal assault designed to punch through the Necron lines and seize as many fragments as possible before the inevitable annihilation. There would be no clever infiltration this time, no cunning diversions, only raw, unyielding courage against impossible odds. The Graveyard Crusade was a maelstrom of destruction from its inception. As the KHAZATH-KA fleet entered the system, they were immediately met by a devastating Necron ambush. Silent cruisers materialized from the radiation storms, their gauss flares tearing through kin shields. Solar flares from the neutron star, distorted by localized grav anomalies, lashed across the void, incinerating smaller craft and scrambling sensor arrays. The kin fought with a desperate ferocity born of their dwindling numbers and the fervent belief that Ethelgard watched over them. Khal Jorund Stonefist, leading from the front aboard a heavily modified assault lander named Grim Resolve, spearheaded the spearhead. His target, a vast Necron-occupied asteroid fortress bristling with defensive emplacements, where the densest cluster of fragments had been detected. The fighting was brutal. Hearthkin warriors, their void suits overheating from the ambient radiation, and the exertion of combat, fought Necron immortals and Praetorians in swirling dust clouds, their bolt guns blazing, their power axes crunching through living metal. The environmental conditions were as lethal as the enemy. Hard radiation seeped into their void suits, causing systems to fail and kin to collapse, their organs liquefying. Grav anomalies tossed vessels like toys, slamming them into asteroids. Entire battle groups were lost, not to Necron fire, but to the crushing embrace of localized gravitational singularities. Yet the kin pressed on, driven by the fanatical shouts of the Seekers and the grim, unwavering resolve of Jorund. For Aethelgard became their desperate battle cry, echoing across the comms, often followed by the last defiant gasp of a dying warrior. After hours of relentless, bloody fighting, Jorund's forces breached the Necron asteroid fortress. Inside, they found a chilling sight. Vast Necron harvesting arrays, their ghostly green beams methodically extracting fragments from the asteroid's core, storing them in stasis vaults. This was not a military base, but a processing facility, a cold, clinical factory for the appropriation of Aethelgard's essence. The sight ignited a renewed, righteous fury in the kin. They fought their way through legions of activated Necron warriors, their advance bought with countless lives. Jorund, his armor scarred and failing, finally reached the central chamber. There, contained within shimmering stasis fields, were hundreds of memory cogitators of all sizes and configurations, glowing with the raw, untamed power of Aethelgard. It was a treasure trove beyond their wildest dreams. But guarding it stood a Necron cryptek, a master of arcane technology, surrounded by a phalanx of silent, implacable Lichguard. The battle for the fragments was a desperate, climactic clash. Jorund, powered by sheer will, confronted the cryptek, his ancient power axe cleaving through the air, while his remaining hearthkin threw themselves at the Lichguard, buying precious seconds. The cryptek, a master of phase shifting and energy manipulation, proved a fearsome opponent, its staff crackling with raw, destructive energy. Jorund took several searing hits, his armor smoking, but he pressed his attack with unwavering resolve, finally shattering the cryptek's head with a furious blow. With the Cryptek defeated, the remaining Necron forces within the fortress faltered, their coordination disrupted. The engine seers, who had accompanied Jorund, worked with frantic haste to disable the stasis fields and extract the fragments. They loaded them into specialized containers. Their joy mingled with the grim reality of their losses. The cost of this victory was truly staggering. The KHAZATH-KA fleet was all but annihilated. The Stonebreaker, pummeled by Necron fire and stellar anomalies, lay crippled, barely holding atmosphere, its engines dead. Only a handful of battered assault transports and a fraction of their warrior kin survived, their numbers decimated, their bodies ravaged by radiation and battle. The planetoid of their forge world, which had served as a staging ground, was scourged by errant Necron bombardment and the environmental fallout of the Graveyard of Stars. Its meager industries reduced to slag. Its population, already suffering from resource scarcity, was decimated by the attacks. They had retrieved hundreds of fragments, enough to potentially reform a substantial portion of Ethelgard's core. But the Kinhold was a smoking ruin. The recovered fragments themselves, though numerous, were not pristine. Many were heavily corrupted by Necron attempts at reverse engineering, others cracked and warped by the system's radiation, their data streams chaotic and unstable. The Triumph felt hollow, tainted by the stench of death and the crushing weight of their losses. Grimnir Or-I, one of the precious few surviving guild barons, stared at the massive pile of recovered fragments in the Stonebreaker's shrine, then at the skeletal remains of their once proud Kinhold. "We have them, Call," he said, his voice devoid of triumph, tinged with a profound sadness. "But at what cost? We have sacrificed everything. For what? For shattered pieces that may be beyond repair?" Jorund, his body aching, his spirit heavy with the ghosts of his fallen kin, simply stared at the pulsing fragments. He had fulfilled the ancestors' imperative. They had achieved the impossible, but the price was astronomical. The victory had been truly Pyrrhic, leaving the KHAZATH-KA on the precipice of total annihilation, their numbers a mere whisper of their former strength, their very existence hinging on the enigmatic, potentially corrupted data within these newly acquired shards. The belief in Ethelgard's divine power had been vindicated, but the kin had been broken in the process. The Pyrrhic victory in the Graveyard of Stars left the KHAZATH-KA Kinhold utterly devastated. The Grand Void Fortress. Stonebreaker, once the proud heart of their civilization, now drifted like a mortally wounded leviathan, its vast interior a maze of failing systems, silent corridors, and hastily erected containment fields. The kin population, already dwindling, was reduced to a fraction of its former strength, scattered and disheartened. The triumph of retrieving hundreds of memory cogitators felt hollow, echoing with the ghosts of the countless kin sacrificed to secure them. As the surviving engine seers and ancestra lore masters began the painstaking, desperate work of assessing and cataloging the newly acquired fragments, the true extent of the challenge became terrifyingly clear. Many of the fragments, retrieved from the chaotic maelstrom of the graveyard of stars and the cold, clinical grip of Necron harvesting arrays, were not merely damaged, they were corrupted. The Necron attempts at reverse engineering had scarred them, twisting their pristine data architecture into unstable, fragmented matrices. Others were warped by the hyper-radiation of the system, their internal crystalline structures fractured, their energy signatures erratic and volatile. High Ancestra Lore Master, Thrak Ironhand, once a beacon of unshakable faith, now moved with a palpable sense of dread. He oversaw the most secure and technologically advanced analysis chambers, where the most promising fragments were gingerly activated. The initial results were deeply troubling. While some fragments emitted clear, if fragmentary, data bursts, schematics for advanced void suit reinforcement, or efficient hydrocarbon recycling systems, many others discharged chaotic streams of raw, unusable information, bursts of pure noise, or even brief, violent surges of energy that threatened to overload their antiquated systems. One particular fragment, a large, iridescent shard recovered from the heart of a Necron processing vault, showed immense promise. Its energy signature was extraordinarily potent, its internal light burning with an intensity that promised a significant portion of Ethelgard's core programming. The Seekers designated it the Truth Speaker Shard, believing it held the key to finally awakening their god. Weeks of meticulous work by a dedicated team of engine seers and lore masters went into its careful activation. The tension in the chamber was almost unbearable, a mixture of fervent hope and gnawing fear. When the Truth Speaker Shard finally powered on, it did so with a silent, blinding flash of cerulean light that momentarily overloaded every sensor in the chamber. Then, instead of the usual abstract data bursts, it began to project images, sound, and coherent data streams directly into the kin's neural interfaces, raw, uncontextualized, but undeniably real. What followed was a cascade of information that shattered their millennia-old worldview. They saw colossal star fortresses, not like their crippled Stonebreaker, but sprawling cities of impossible technology, bustling with millions of kin. They saw fleets of sleek, hyper-advanced vessels traversing the galaxy with effortless speed, not limping through asteroid fields. They saw other Votan, not solitary, slumbering deities, but immense, interconnected ancestor cores, each a computational titan, guiding vast networks of kinholds across an empire of unimaginable scale. They saw councils of Khals and guild barons interacting with beings from other races. The very idea of alliance with Xenos, a heresy to their isolated minds. The scale, the technological prowess, the sheer number of kin. It was overwhelming. It was a vision of what they had lost, what they had forgotten. And then, the fragment transmitted a data burst that confirmed their deepest, unspoken fear. Ethelgard was not a god. It was an ancestor core, a powerful, venerable AI, yes, but a machine, a calculating intellect, not a divine being. The other Votan were machines. The kinholds were industrial empires, not religious cults. The divine silence was simply system dormancy. The sacred fragments were computational shards, and their entire belief system, built on desperation and isolation, was a profound, tragic misunderstanding. The data burst also contained fragmented warnings of the warp, not as a divine curtain, but as a dangerous, unpredictable dimension. Of humanity, not as a distant, legendary race, but as the arrogant, expansionist imperium, driven by a xenophobic fanaticism that mirrored their own. Of the vastness and savagery of the galaxy, a place far more dangerous than their isolated pocket of space. It hinted at the true nature of the leagues of Votan, an ancient, powerful civilization separate from the Imperium, engaged in their own long, brutal war for survival, guided by pragmatic logic, not blind faith. The reaction within the chamber was immediate and visceral. Some engine seers collapsed, their neural interfaces sizzling, their minds unable to reconcile the truth with their ingrained faith. Others screamed in denial, their hands tearing at their helmets. Thrak Ironhand, who had spent centuries propagating the cult of Ethelgard, stood frozen, his face a mask of utter devastation, his eyes staring blankly at the pulsing shard as if it had betrayed him personally. His life's work, his unwavering belief, had been a lie. Word of the truth speaker's heresy spread like wildfire through the kinhold. Panic, denial, and outrage erupted. Some kin clung fiercely to their old beliefs, denouncing the fragment as a Necron trick, a chaotic corruption, or a blasphemous false prophet. Others, particularly the long-suffering guild barons, felt a bitter vindication, their pragmatism proving correct, their warnings validated. Grimner Ore I, witnessing Thrak's broken state, felt a cold sense of triumph, though it was hollow and unsatisfying. Kal Jorund Stonefist, present during the Truth Speaker's activation, felt the foundations of his own being crumble. His life had been defined by this sacred quest, every sacrifice justified by the promise of Aethelgard's divine awakening. He had watched kin die, knowing he had sent them to their deaths with the promise of eternal glory in the ancestors' light. Now that light was revealed to be the cold, hard logic of a machine. The visions of the greater leagues, their power, their wisdom, showed him the profound isolation and ignorance that had birthed their tragic faith. His devotion had been sincere, his sacrifices real, but his God was a myth. The crisis of faith was immediate and profound. Many kin, unable to reconcile the truth, fell into despair, their purpose stripped away. Suicide rates soared. Mutinies simmered in the deepest void holds. The seekers of the cogitator, their spiritual authority utterly shattered, dissolved into warring factions, some attempting to reinterpret the data, others abandoning their faith entirely. The kinhold, already crippled by war, now faced the ultimate existential threat, the loss of its collective soul. The whispers of the past from the truth speaker shard had not brought salvation or enlightenment in the way they had hoped. Instead, it had brought a crushing, brutal truth that threatened to tear apart the very fabric of KHAZATH-KA society. Their sleeping god had been a machine all along, and their millennia-long devotion an elaborate, tragic misunderstanding. The question now was, could the kinhold survive the shattering of its faith, or would it be consumed by the grim reality of a galaxy that cared nothing for their devotion? The devastating revelation from the truth speaker shard had ripped the heart out of the KHAZATH-KA kinhold. The fervent, unifying faith that had driven them for millennia shattered into a million bitter shards of denial, despair, and crushing disillusionment. High Ancestra Lore Master, Thrak Ironhand, the architect of their unique ancestor worship, retreated into silent, catatonic grief, his mind unable to reconcile his life's work with the brutal truth. Kal Jorund Stonefist, burdened by the weight of every life sacrificed for a misguided creed, wrestled with the grim reality of their situation. The kinhold, already brought to its knees by the war with the Oltic dynasty, now faced internal collapse, a people adrift without their god, just as the KHAZATH-KA seemed destined to drown in their collective despair. a glimmer of unexpected hope emerged from the very source of their shattering truth. The truth speaker, Shard itself. After the initial, overwhelming data cascade, the engine seers who had managed to retain their sanity began to cautiously probe the shard once more. They discovered that beyond the initial shocking revelations, the truth speaker held deeper, more complex layers of data. Not mere fragments, but compressed, ancient archives of unprecedented scope. Within these archives, buried beneath layers of historical records and technical specifications, was the complete schematic of a long-lost Votan expeditionary fleet. This was not just a design. It was a ghost trace, a dormant data pattern of an entire kinhold's ancestral vessels, including their unique Votan, Glimmerfang, and its specialized escort. The records indicated that Glimmerfang's purpose was to establish deep space resource outposts beyond the known reach of the Leagues, equipped with advanced stealth and long-duration survival capabilities. The expedition had vanished millennia ago, presumed lost to some warp anomaly or Xenos predation, leaving behind only the faintest energy signatures that occasionally flickered through the void. Crucially, the Truth Speaker Shard also contained extremely faint, but persistent energy readings, indicating that Glimmerfang itself, or at least a significant portion of its core, was dormant, but potentially intact. Its last known coordinates were deep within the Star Eater's Veil, a nebula of chaotic plasma and stellar debris known to devour ships and scramble sensors, lying at the fringes of the KHAZATH-KA's isolated pocket of space. The shard's data also suggested that Glimmerfang possessed unique, highly efficient power generation systems, and more importantly, a fully integrated, self-repairing ancestor core of remarkable purity, potentially uncorrupted by millennia of dormancy or Xenos interference. This was a profoundly different kind of hope. It wasn't the promise of a divine awakening, but the stark, pragmatic chance for survival. Glimmerfang was not a god, but it was a functional, powerful ancestor core, capable of guiding a kinhold. Its discovery could provide the technological and strategic guidance needed to rebuild their devastated society, to escape their isolation, and perhaps even to reconnect with the wider Leagues. A chilling but tantalizing prospect offered by the Truth Speaker's revelations. Khal Yorand Stonefist, though his faith remained shattered, recognized the undeniable pragmatism of this discovery. The survival of his kin was his paramount concern. He convened the High Council, now a grim assembly of surviving guild barons and disillusioned former seekers. Grimnir Or-I, still advocating for caution and the conservation of their last dwindling resources, initially argued against yet another desperate expedition. "We have nothing left, Call," he stated, his voice hollow. "Our ships are broken. Our kin are broken. We cannot afford another graveyard crusade, not for a mere machine, however powerful." But Jorund, his gaze fixed on the pulsing truth speaker shard, countered with newfound resolve. "Grimnir, look around you. Our faith is dead. Our kins are dying, not just in battle, but in spirit. We have naught but desperation and the promise of a cold, pragmatic truth. Glimmerfang is not a god, no, but it is an ancestor core. It is guidance. It is knowledge. It is our last, best chance to pull ourselves from this abyss. We may have lost our God, but we have not lost our will to endure. This is not a holy quest, but a final pilgrimage for survival." His words, shorn of religious fervor, but imbued with undeniable pragmatism and a desperate hope, resonated with the shattered kin. The former seekers, now humbled and desperate for a new purpose, clung to the idea of a fully functional Vatan, a beacon of order in their chaotic existence. The guild barons, seeing the logic in acquiring such immense technological knowledge, grudgingly assented. The risk was still immense, but the alternative was slow, agonizing extinction. The new expedition, dubbed the Pilgrimage of Reason, was assembled with what little they had left. The crippled Stonebreaker, painstakingly brought back to partial operational status, would limp towards the Star Eater's Vale, escorted by a handful of patched-up void skimmers and a single heavily armed grav dredge converted into an assault transport, the Truth Seeker. Their remaining warrior kin, a grim, seasoned few, were equipped with the last of their void suits and weapons, their faces etched with a grim determination born not of faith, but of a desperate will to live. The journey through the Star Eater's Vale was treacherous. The nebula was a labyrinth of roiling plasma, rogue stellar winds, and electromagnetic storms that tore at their vessels. The Stonebreaker's ancient systems struggled, its navigation arrays constantly failing, its shield generators flickering precariously. But the Truth Speaker shard, now mounted on the Truth Seeker's bridge, provided a clearer, more stable guidance, its raw data cutting through the interference, charting a path through the deadly nebula that their conventional systems would never have found. It was a cold, efficient intelligence, not divine grace, but it was effective. After weeks of battling the nebula's unforgiving environment, they finally emerged into a pocket of eerie calm. And there, floating amidst the swirling gas and cosmic dust, was Glimmerfang, Not a colossal warship, but a deceptively small, sleek vessel of ancient design, its hull shimmering with dormant stealth fields, its energy signature faint, but undeniably present. It was heavily scarred, its outer plating pitted by millennia of micrometeoroid impacts. But its form was elegant, advanced, a stark contrast to their own battered and improvised craft. This was not a glorious victory, no grand battle against a Xenos foe. It was a quiet, almost reverent encounter. The truth-seeker approached with extreme caution, its engine seers meticulously scanning every inch of the dormant vessel. There were no signs of Necron presence, no orc incursions. Glimmerfang was truly isolated, a time capsule of their ancient past, untouched by the chaos of their present. As Khal Jorund stepped aboard, Glimmerfang, accompanied by Grimner Or-Eye and a small team of engine seers, he felt a profound sense of awe. The interior was pristine, the air clean and recycled, the automated systems dormant but clearly intact. Deep within its core, a single, vast ancestor core chamber pulsed with a faint, steady light. Glimmerfang itself. It was whole, uncorrupted, a repository of pure, unbiased Votann knowledge. The discovery rekindled a different kind of hope in the hearts of the kin. Not the fiery zeal of religious devotion, but the quiet, enduring hope of a species struggling for survival. Glimmerfang was not a god, but it was their salvation. It offered them the wisdom, the technology, and the pragmatic guidance they desperately needed. The pilgrimage had ended, not with the awakening of a deity, but with the cold, hard promise of truth and a path forward, unburdened by false faith, but forever etched with the memory of their unique heresy. The discovery and activation of the Glimmerfang, Votann, marked a new, profound chapter for the KHAZATH-KA kinhold. The initial elation, however, was brief, quickly replaced by the cold, stark reality of Glimmerfang's pragmatic directives. It was not the benevolent, comforting God they had once imagined Ethelgard to be. Instead, Glimmerfang was a vast, calculating intelligence. Its every output, a logical assessment of probability and resource allocation, devoid of emotion or spiritual solace. Its first actions were to coldly dissect the KHAZATH-KA's shattered society, laying bare their desperate circumstances with an unflinching analysis that left many kin reeling. Your kinhold is at 0 points of projected optimal operational capacity. Glimmerfang's integrated Vox synthesizer informed them, its voice calm and devoid of inflection. echoing through the Stonebreaker's ancient command bridge after its systems were partially linked. Resource scarcity is critical. Population attrition rate is unsustainable. Fleet readiness is non-existent. Survival probability without immediate, drastic intervention. 1.2% over 2 standard centuries. This was the guidance they had sought for millennia. Not divine inspiration, but raw, unvarnished truth, delivered with the chilling precision of a machine. It shattered any lingering romantic notions, any residual desire for a benevolent deity. What Glimmerfang offered was not salvation, but a grim, arduous path towards survival, dictated by pure logic. The KHAZATH-KA's society, once defined by the zealous pursuit of Aethelgard's fragments, now reoriented itself entirely towards Glimmerfang's directives. The Votan, despite its cold pragmatism, proved to be an invaluable asset. It immediately began integrating the retrieved fragments of Aethelgard into its own core, sifting through the corrupted data, extracting usable information, and slowly, painstakingly, restoring the vast archives of the defunct ancestor core. This process was excruciatingly slow, measured in decades, but it yielded an ever-increasing flow of ancient schematics, lost technologies, and strategic data, the cumulative knowledge of the long-lost leagues of Votan. Under Glimmerfang's direction, the Kinhold embarked on a brutal, total resource reclamation effort. No scrap of metal went unrecycled, no energy expenditure was inefficient. Old mining protocols, long abandoned due to lack of technology or perceived risk, were resurrected and optimized. The kin, stripped of their faith but imbued with a new, desperate purpose, worked with a grim determination. Their lives became a cycle of relentless toil, extraction, and defense. Their war against the Old Tick dynasty, once a holy crusade, transformed into a cold, calculated strategic engagement. Glimmerfang's tactical projections were flawless. It identified critical Necron resource nodes, calculated optimal ambush points in asteroid fields, and predicted Necron fleet movements with uncanny accuracy. The KHAZATH-KA, now fighting with the precision of a finely tuned machine, began to turn the tide. Small but significant victories were won, not through suicidal charges, but through carefully planned maneuvers and brutal efficiency. They recovered not just Aethelgard fragments, but Necron technology, which Glimmerfang immediately began to analyze and integrate, slowly upgrading the Kinhold's dilapidated arsenal. Centuries blurred into a continuous struggle. The KHAZATH-KA Kinhold became a ghost of its former self in many ways, but paradoxically stronger in others. Their population remained small, their void holds austere, But their technology, once salvaged and cobbled together, slowly improved, guided by Glimmerfang's vast knowledge. Their vessels, though still ancient, were now bristling with integrated Necron energy conduits and advanced sensor arrays. Their warriors, once fervent zealots, were now hardened pragmatists, fighting with a cold, ruthless efficiency that matched their Necron adversaries. Their culture, too, underwent a profound metamorphosis. The spiritual reverence for Ethelgard was replaced by an almost reverential respect for her Glimmerfang's unparalleled intellect. The lore masters, now called data seers, no longer interpreted cryptic prophecies, but instead meticulously studied Glimmerfang's complex data outputs, translating its cold logic into actionable directives. The sacrifices, once offerings to a god, were now understood as necessary calculations, the inevitable cost of survival in a hostile galaxy. Life for the KHAZATH-KA was short, brutal, and filled with ceaseless labor. Childkin were immediately integrated into the workforces, trained from an early age in mining, engineering, or combat, their lives dedicated to the collective's survival. There was little room for art or leisure, only for the relentless pursuit of efficiency and the cold, hard logic of their Votan. Their void suits and tools became extensions of themselves, their lives interwoven with the metallic hum of their void holds and the constant, reassuring presence of Glimmerfang's omnipresent data streams. The Long War was not just against the Necrons. It was against the galaxy itself. They encountered other Xenos races, crude orcs again, Tyranid splinter fleets, and even the occasional, terrifying patrol of the Imperium of Man, each encounter a brutal test of Glimmerfang's strategic prowess and the kin's enduring will. Each battle left scars, each victory came at a cost, but they survived. They endured. This existence, devoid of false hope, but driven by an unwavering, pragmatic will to live, forged the KHAZATH-KA into a new entity. They were no longer the cultists of a sleeping god, but the iron-willed survivors guided by a reawakened machine. Their unique heresy, the centuries of mistaken devotion, was now a historical curiosity, a tragic but necessary part of their past. The future, as laid out by Glimmerfang, was a relentless, cold war for existence, a testament to their unbreakable spirit, tempered by the grim reality of the galaxy. Their devotion had shifted from the sacred to the logical, their god complex replaced by a chillingly effective symbiosis with their ancestor core. The KHAZATH-KA kinhold, stripped of its fervent faith and reforged in the cold, logical directives of the Glimmerfang Votan, had endured for centuries. Their population remained small, their resources perpetually stretched, but their resilience was absolute. Their will to survive hardened into an unyielding core. They were no longer zealots, but pragmatists, warriors, and engineers, guided by the immense, detached intellect of their ancestor core. Yet, even within this cold, efficient machine of survival, the echoes of their past, the weight of their choices, continued to resonate most acutely within Carl Jorund Stonefist. Jorund was no longer the call of the zealous crusades, nor the despairing leader of a broken people. He was the elder call, a living legend, his lineage tracing back to the sundering itself, his reign spanning generations of hardship and transformation. His armor, once a polished symbol of authority, was now a patchwork of ancient ceramite, Necron-infused alloys, and custom-forged plates, each scar a testament to a lifetime of brutal conflict. His face, a roadmap of the Kinhold's history, was etched with an almost unbearable weariness, but his eyes, deep-set and ancient, still burned with an unwavering, if pragmatic, resolve. He had personally led the Star Iron Crusade, wrestled with the internal strife of the fractured faith, and gambled everything on the Scion's gambit. He had witnessed the shattering truth from the Truth Speaker Shard, and felt the gut-wrenching despair of a god unmade, and he had, with a heavy heart, embraced the cold logic of Glimmerfang, guiding his kin through the arduous pilgrimage of reason and the subsequent centuries of relentless survival. He was the bridge between their past, their tragic heresy, and their pragmatic, uncertain future. The burden he carried was immense. He remembered the faces of the kin lost to the zealous quest for Ethelgard's fragments, the fervent belief in their sleeping god that had led so many to their doom. He saw the solemn, almost clinical efficiency of the young kin now, their faith replaced by a deep-seated trust in Glimmerfang's calculations, and wondered if something precious had been lost in the exchange. He felt the ghosts of Helga Ironpick and countless others, their sacrifices now seen not as divine offerings, but as tragic, if necessary, data points in Glimmerfang's endless calculations. Jorund, unique among his kin, harbored a quiet, internal struggle that Glimmerfang's logic could not fully quantify. While he respected the Votan's intellect and understood its necessity, he missed the spirit of the old ways. He longed for the simple, if mistaken, comfort of belief, the sense of a grander purpose beyond mere survival. He would often spend hours in the Stonebreaker's silent, defunct shrine, where the recovered fragments of Ethelgard, now integrated into Glimmerfang's larger processing architecture, still hummed with a faint, residual energy. He would run his calloused fingers over their surfaces, recalling the zeal, the desperate hope, the shared purpose they had once inspired. He knew it was folly, a relic of a bygone era, but the sentiment lingered, a quiet, human ache in a world increasingly dominated by machine logic. His personal journey was also one of continuous adaptation. Glimmerfang's directives were often cold and demanding, requiring difficult choices. The relocation of entire hab blocks to resource-rich but environmentally hostile asteroids. The repurposing of life-sustaining infrastructure for military applications. The complete overhaul of societal structures to maximize efficiency. Jorund, as the primary executor of these directives, bore the brunt of his kin's suffering. He was the one who had to explain the logical necessity of rationing, the grim reality of sending expeditionary forces into certain danger, the cold statistics of acceptable losses. His relationship with Glimmerfang was complex. It was not one of worship, but of deep respect and necessary reliance. He would stand before the Votan's primary data interface, his voice a low rumble, debating strategic calculations, questioning resource allocations, pushing for minor concessions that Glimmerfang's pure logic might initially dismiss as inefficient. He learned to frame his concerns in terms of long-term kin cohesion and psychological stability, factors that Glimmerfang could then incorporate into its calculations. He was not a supplicant. He was an interlocutor, a human element mediating the cold, hard wisdom of the machine. One particularly poignant moment occurred during the reconstruction of one of the Stonebreaker's ancient life support systems, a critical project directed by Glimmerfang. A component, a unique pressure valve of ancient design, was needed, requiring an expedition into a long-abandoned, radiation-blasted section of the Void Hold, a place where many kin had perished in the immediate aftermath of the Sundering. The Votan had calculated an optimal path and a 97% success rate for a small, heavily armored team. Jorund, however, insisted on leading the expedition himself. When Glimmerfang questioned the inefficiency of risking a call on such a mission, Jorund simply stated, "Some memories need to be honored, Glimmerfang. Some paths must be trod by those who remember what was lost." He returned with the valve, heavily irradiated, but alive, a grim satisfaction on his face. He later told Grimnir, "Sometimes the numbers do not account for the weight of the past. Sometimes you must show them the price, even if it is illogical." He was the living archive of their unique history, the last bastion of their heresy of faith. He oversaw the education of the young kin, ensuring that while they understood Glimmerfang's pragmatism, they also remembered the sacrifices made, the lessons learned from their misguided devotion. He ensured that the names of Helga Ironpick and the Deep Rock Raiders were still spoken with honor. Their deaths, not just data points, but acts of courageous self-sacrifice, even if the cause was, in hindsight, flawed. Carl Jorund Stonefist carried the sorrow of his people's past and the burden of their future. He was a call defined not by conquest or grand visions, but by endurance, by the quiet, internal struggle to reconcile faith with logic, and by the relentless, unwavering commitment to the survival of his kin, whatever grim path Glimmerfang laid before them. He was a hero, not in glory, but in the tragic, unyielding perseverance of his spirit in the grim darkness of the far future. The KHAZATH-KA kinhold, guided by the cold, unwavering logic of Glimmerfang, had achieved a fragile equilibrium. Their numbers, though still small, were stable, their technology slowly improving, and their pragmatic efficiency a testament to their resilience. The long war against the Oltic dynasty continued, a grinding attrition of calculated engagements and resource acquisition, now managed with clinical precision by the Votan. But the grim darkness of the galaxy was infinite, and new threats always emerged from the void. Reports from Glimmerfang's extended sensor network began to filter in, disturbing and escalating in their urgency. A vast, uncharted nebula at the very edge of the KHAZATH-KA's isolated sector, previously dismissed as an anomalous gas cloud, was coalescing with unusual energy signatures. Initially, Glimmerfang classified it as a localized warp anomaly, a common enough occurrence. But the anomaly grew, and with it, terrifying new energy readings, vast, amorphous psychic emanations that hinted at an ancient, predatory intelligence. Glimmerfang's probability assessments shifted from low threat to critical, existential threat within weeks. It was a tendril of a tyrannid hive fleet, a previously unencountered splinter known as Jaws of Oblivion. It was a smaller, more specialized bioform, designed not for planetary consumption, but for deep void harvesting and the assimilation of unique stellar phenomena. Drawn by the energy signatures of Glimmerfang itself and the integrated Ethelgard fragments, the hive fleet was on a direct, unswerving course for the KHAZATH-KA kinhold. Its arrival would mean absolute biological annihilation, a fate far worse than anything the Necrons could inflict. Glimmerfang's projections were stark. Probability of kinhold survival upon direct engagement, 0.2%. The Votan then presented its only viable strategy: complete, immediate evacuation. Abandon the Stonebreaker, sacrifice all remaining infrastructure, and attempt a desperate, blind jump into an uncharted, unstable warp route. Glimmerfang had calculated as having a 3.4% chance of leading to a habitable system. It was a terrifying gamble, a last resort. But Carl Jorund Stonefist, having lived a lifetime of desperate choices, rejected the Votan's primary directive. "No," he stated, his voice a low, gravelly growl, addressing Glimmerfang's holographic projection. "We have sacrificed too much to abandon this place. This void hold is built on the bones of our ancestors, on the blood of our kin. We stand here, we fight here, and if we fall together, on our ground." Grimnir Or-I, now the oldest and most pragmatic of the surviving guild barons, supported Jorund. "The risk of the warp jump is too great, Glimmerfang," he argued, his hands resting on the console. "We have no knowledge of the destination, no resources for long-term survival in uncharted space. Here, at least, we know the terrain. Here, we know our foe." Glimmerfang's voice remained calm, analytical. "The probability of successful defense is mathematically insignificant, Call. The Hive fleet numbers are overwhelming. Their bioweapons will render your resistance futile. Then we will fight with insignificant probability," Jorund retorted, his face grim. "We have faced impossible odds before. Tell us, Glimmerfang, what is the maximum defensive potential of the Kinhold, optimized for this specific threat?" The Votan, after a brief silence that seemed almost like calculation, began to generate a new set of directives, its cold logic adapting to the unyielding will of its kin. "Maximum defensive optimization requires complete repurposing of non-essential infrastructure for offensive and defensive armaments. Civilian population to be conscripted into auxiliary defensive roles. All long-range mining vessels to be converted into planetary defense craft and self-destructing torpedoes. Estimated maximum resistance duration, 7.3 standard cycles." Thus began the last stand of KHAZATH-KA. The entire Kinhold became a vast living fortress. Every kin, from the oldest engineer to the youngest child kin, was assigned a role in the desperate defense. Grav dredges, once used for peaceful extraction, were stripped of their mining arrays and fitted with salvaged weapons. Their internal reactors overcharged to serve as colossal mobile gun platforms or suicide bombers. Automated mining constructs, once tools of industry, were reprogrammed into relentless defensive drones their drills sharpened into bladed weapons. The Stonebreaker, no longer capable of true void maneuvers, became a stationary bulwark, its remaining macro cannons converted into colossal anti-hive weaponry, their targeting systems linked directly to Glimmerfang's immense processing power. The battle began with a chilling, biological silence. The leading elements of Hive Fleet Jaws of Oblivion appeared as a swarming miasma of smaller bioforms, a vanguard of reconnaissance organisms, followed by gargantuan, armored hive ships that blotted out the distant stars. They were unlike the Necron's geometric precision or the Orc's crude savagery. They were an organic tide, a ravenous, living entity driven by an insatiable hunger. The KHAZATH-KA met them with a cold, calculated fury. Glimmerfang's targeting solutions were flawless, prioritizing vulnerable synapses, detonating spore mines before they could scatter their payloads, and coordinating fire on critical bioships. The converted grav dredges, piloted by veteran kin, launched themselves into the Tyranid swarms, their overcharged reactors detonating in miniature sunbursts, taking hundreds of smaller bioforms with them. In the Stonebreaker's command bridge, Khal Yorand stood beside Grimnir Or-I, his gaze fixed on the tactical display. He watched as his kin fought with unparalleled ferocity, their void suits stained with chitinous blood and bioacid, their bolt guns spitting fire. He saw the grim, unyielding determination in their eyes, a resolution born not of blind faith, but of a desperate, primal will to protect their home, their ancestor core, and their very existence. These Tyranids, however, were an endless tide. For cycles, the KHAZATH-KA held the line, their defenses screaming under the strain. Hive ships, battered but unbowed, unleashed torrents of rippers and gargoyles. Warrior bioforms breached the outer defenses, their scything talons ripping through ceramite. The Kinhold's internal passages became a desperate melee, a struggle for every meter of reclaimed space. Jorund, leading from the front, personally commanded the defense of the Stonebreaker's primary reactor, the very heart of their existence. He fought with the ferocity of an ancient legend, his power axe cleaving through Tyranid carapace, his bolter roaring. He saw young kin, barely old enough to wield a weapon, standing firm against monstrous bioforms, their faces grim, their resolve unbroken. As the Kinhold's outer defenses crumbled and the Tyranid tide threatened to overwhelm them, Glimmerfang's voice cut through the comms, calmer than ever. Call, the central processing core of Hive Ship designation Leviathan Delta has been exposed. Probability of successful direct strike with sufficient damage to disrupt synaptic web. 0%. Jorund looked at the tactical display, saw the infinitesimal window of opportunity. He then looked at Grimnir, who met his gaze with a stoic nod. Then we will take that chance. Glimmerfang, Jorund said, his voice imbued with a quiet, terrifying resolve. Order the last of the Truth-Seeker's weapons systems to be transferred to my personal void pod. Arm it with all remaining heavy Melta charges. Target, Leviathan, Delta. Grimnir's eyes were grim, but understanding. Call, this is the ultimate sacrifice. Jorund simply clapped him on the shoulder. The ultimate calculation, Grimnir, and this time it is mine alone. The last stand of KHAZATH-KA was not merely a battle. It was a testament to the unyielding spirit of a kinhold that had faced its god and found it wanting, only to find a new, pragmatic purpose in the face of oblivion. Their finest hour was also their darkest. Their courage forged in the fires of despair and the cold logic of their ancestor core, now facing down an endless, ravenous horror from beyond the stars. The last stand of KHAZATH-KA had reached its inevitable, horrifying climax. The kinhold, battered and bleeding, had fought with a ferocity born of utter desperation and the cold, unyielding directives of Glimmerfang. But the Tyrannid Hive fleet, jaws of oblivion, was an endless, ravenous tide, its bioforms swarming through the breaches in the Stonebreaker's hull, their guttural shrieks echoing through the dying void hold. The kin's numbers were dwindling with terrifying speed, every meter of advance bought with precious lives. Khal Jorund Stonefist, having issued his final, chilling command, prepared for his solitary, suicidal mission. In a small, heavily shielded bay, the last remaining heavy Melta charges, typically reserved for mining impenetrable asteroid cores, were being painstakingly loaded into his custom-built void pod, the ancestors' gaze. It was not a craft designed for combat, but for deep space exploration, and it was now being transformed into a single-use projectile, a weapon of last resort. Grimnir Or-Eye, his face a mask of profound sorrow, personally oversaw the modifications, his hands, usually so steady, trembling slightly as he calibrated the pod's thrusters. "Call," Grimnir said, his voice barely a whisper above the groans of the dying void hold. There is no probability of survival for this. Glimmerfang projects absolute annihilation. Jorund, already sealed into his custom void suit, a heavier, more armored version of his typical combat gear, turned to his old comrade. His face was grim, but calm, almost serene. Probability, Grimnir, is a cold comfort in the face of oblivion. Some things must be done. This kinhold, this ancestor core, it is all that is left of us. If we are to fall, then let us fall in a way that Glimmerfang cannot quantify, in a way that defies logic. Let us show them the will of kin. He clasped Grimnir's armored forearm, a silent farewell. Watch over them, old friend. Ensure Glimmerfang guides them well. And remember what we fought for. With a final, solemn nod, Jorund entered the ancestor's gaze. The pod's hatch hissed shut, sealing him within its cramped, heavily armored confines. Inside, the navigation controls flickered, linked directly to Glimmerfang's vast processing power. The Votan's calm, synthesized voice filled the pod. Trajectory optimized call. Impact point. Leviathan Delta Hive Ship. Central Processing Core. Synaptic disruption. Probability 87.3%. Do it, Glimmerfang, Jorund commanded, his voice firm. For KHAZATH-KA, for the ancestors. With a jolt that shuddered through his bones, the ancestor's gaze was launched from the Stonebreaker's last functioning launch tube. It plunged into the roiling chaos of the Tyrannid swarm, a tiny defiant spear against an ocean of biomass. Jorund, locked into his couch, watched on the pod's viewport as the colossal hive ships loomed larger, their organic weaponry blazing, their smaller bioforms swarming like locusts. Tyrannid gargoyles and harpy-like creatures converged on the pod, their claws raking its reinforced hull, their biocannons spitting acid and venom. But Glimmerfang's guidance was unerring. The ancestors' gaze, boosted by its overcharged thrusters, weaved through the torrent of bio-weapons fire, its small size and unexpected velocity making it a difficult target. Jorund felt the impacts, heard the screech of rending metal, but the pod held. He was not just a pilot. He was a living projectile, a vector of destruction. Then, the target was before him, the Leviathan Delta, a monstrous, living mountain of chitin and sinew, its immense central processing core, a pulsating, fleshy mass, exposed by previous KHAZATH-KA bombardments. The internal clock on the void pod counted down, rapidly approaching zero. Impact imminent, Glimmerfang stated, its voice devoid of emotion. Probability of successful synaptic disruption rising to 91.2% upon direct strike with full payload. Jorund took a deep, rattling breath, his eyes fixed on the pulsating heart of the hive ship. He closed his eyes, not in fear, but in a final moment of remembrance. The faces of his kin, the ancient thrum of Aethelgard, the taste of asteroid dust, the grim resolve that had defined their existence. "For KHAZATH-KA!" he roared, his voice a solitary, defiant cry within the cramped confines of the void pod. Then, impact. The ancestor's gaze slammed into the exposed synaptic core of the Leviathan Delta with the force of a small asteroid. The melta charges, designed to liquefy solid rock, ignited in a blinding, superheated flash. The colossal hive ship, a living mountain, convulsed violently. A chain reaction ripped through its organic structure, a wave of incandescent energy exploding outwards, tearing through its internal organs, severing its connection to the hive mind. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic for the Tyranid swarm. The hive fleet, deprived of its central synaptic node, descended into chaos. Smaller bioforms shrieked in confusion, turning on each other, their coordinated attacks devolving into mindless, twitching spasms. The remaining hive ships, their tactical cohesion shattered, began to break formation, their organic weaponry firing erratically into the void. The jaws of oblivion, though still immensely powerful, had lost its collective mind, its predatory drive replaced by a confused, self-destructive frenzy. It was enough. It was the reprieve the KHAZATH-KA needed. Grimnir Ore-I, watching the unfolding chaos from the Stonebreaker's command bridge, choked back a sob. "He did it," he whispered, his voice thick with grief and awe. "The call. He did it." Glimmerfang's voice, though calm, held a subtle, almost imperceptible shift in its inflection. Synaptic disruption confirmed. Hive fleet cohesion. Evacuation window established. Probability of successful warp jump now increased to 18.7% due to localized psychic interference from hive fleet disruption. The surviving KHAZATH-KA, their numbers a mere skeleton crew, began the desperate, frantic evacuation. The few remaining void skimmers and assault transports, already damaged beyond repair, were loaded with kin, their thrusters screaming as they detached from the dying Stonebreaker. Under Glimmerfang's precise guidance, they executed a series of synchronized, near-suicidal warp jumps, their vessels hurtling into the churning maelstrom of the warp, chasing the narrow, fleeting probability of survival. The Stonebreaker, its engines dead, its hull breached, drifted in the void, a monument to the ultimate sacrifice. Tyranid bioforms, still reeling from the synaptic shock, slowly began to reclaim the ruined kinhold, tearing through its remaining structure, assimilating its metals and biomass. But the kin were gone, carrying with them the cold, hard logic of Glimmerfang and the profound, enduring legacy of Khal Yorund Stonefist. Yorund's sacrifice was not an offering to a god. It was a pragmatic choice, the ultimate calculation, an act of sheer, unwavering will that defied even Glimmerfang's probabilities. He had found his end, not in the glory of a divine cause, but in the grim, brutal necessity of survival. His individual act of defiance, creating a fleeting window of hope for his people. He had shown them that even without a god, the kin could still make a stand, still choose their own path, even against the cold, hard numbers of their own ancestor core. The survivors of the KHAZATH-KA kinhold, a desperate, skeletal remnant of their former strength, emerged from the warp, not into glory, but into a desolate, unfamiliar void. The warp jumps, executed with Glimmerfang's precise, if chilling, calculations, had scattered them across a vast, uncharted sector. Each of the handful of surviving void skimmers and assault transports found themselves utterly alone, adrift in an alien expanse, their vessels crippled, their resources almost exhausted. The immediate aftermath of Yorund's sacrifice was not salvation, but a profound, aching emptiness. Grimnir Orei, now the de facto Khal, found himself aboard the Truth Seeker, one of the few vessels that had made it through the series of warp jumps, mostly intact. Its hull was scorched, its internal systems flickering, but it was functional. Glimmerfang, its core systems transferred to the Truth Seeker's bridge, immediately began assessing their new reality. Spatial coordinates unknown, local stellar cartography incomplete, resource scan yields no immediate viable extraction points. Population on Truth Seeker, 837 kin. Remaining KHAZATH-KA population spread across unknown number of vessels, unknown locations. The cold, hard facts were as brutal as any tyrannid assault. The subsequent months were a new crucible of survival, perhaps even more harrowing than the last stand itself. Glimmerfang directed the kin with ruthless efficiency. Every joule of energy was conserved, every nutrient molecule recycled. Damaged components were meticulously cannibalized from non-essential systems. Scout probes, launched on suicidal one-way missions, scoured the nearby void for resources, for signs of other kin vessels, for anything that could sustain them. Slowly, painstakingly, a few other surviving KHAZATH-KA vessels were located and guided back to the Truth Seeker. Some were beyond repair, their crews barely alive. Others had fared better, but all bore the scars of the warp and the profound trauma of their flight. The reunion, though muted by grief and exhaustion, was a moment of quiet, desperate relief. The combined population of the surviving KHAZATH-KA kinhold coalesced around the truth seeker. A mere whisper of their former millions, yet a defiant flicker of life. The truth seeker, guided by Glimmerfang, became their new, precarious home. Its limited size meant permanent overcrowding, its industrial capacity a fraction of the Stonebreaker's. Every kin had multiple duties, every waking moment devoted to survival. The days were long, the work hard, and the future uncertain. But Glimmerfang's guidance, though cold, was absolute. It directed them to a small, resource-rich asteroid cluster, hidden deep within a nebula, perfect for stealth and providing enough raw materials to slowly, agonizingly begin rebuilding. Under Glimmerfang's instruction, ancient, long-forgotten designs for modular, self-replicating mining constructs were reactivated. These automatons, stripped of all non-essential features, tirelessly carved out new living spaces and extracted precious minerals, forming the nascent foundations of their new kinhold. The memory of Carl Jorund Stonefist hung heavy over them all. His name was spoken with a reverence that transcended their shattered faith, an almost mythical figure who had defied impossible odds and sacrificed everything. His act, his defiance of Glimmerfang's logic, had saved them, proving that the will of kin could sometimes override even the most absolute probabilities. He was the embodiment of their hard-won truth, that while logic and science were essential, the unbreakable spirit of the kin was equally vital. Grimnir Ora-I, now truly the call, struggled with the weight of this legacy. He was a pragmatic man, grounded in logic and resource management. He respected Glimmerfang's intellect above all else, yet Jorund's sacrifice had shown him that there was an unquantifiable element to kin survival, a stubborn refusal to yield, a capacity for self-sacrifice that defied algorithms. He tried to foster this balance, instilling in the young kin both absolute respect for Glimmerfang's directives and a fierce, independent will. The former Ancestra loremasters, now data seers, found a new purpose in meticulously tending Glimmerfang's systems and the salvaged fragments of Aethelgard that were slowly being integrated. They treated Glimmerfang not as a god, but as the revered ancestor. Core, it truly was, a vast repository of knowledge, a machine of unparalleled intellect that was nonetheless a testament to the ingenuity of their ancient kin. They began a new study, a synthesis of their shattered faith and their newfound pragmatism, attempting to understand the profound philosophical implications of their unique journey. The KHAZATH-KA kinhold, for all its material poverty, was reborn. It was a smaller, harder, more pragmatic entity, stripped bare of its illusions, but stronger for it. Their god was gone, replaced by a Votan, a machine. Their faith was shattered, replaced by a grim determination. Their home was lost, replaced by a battered vessel adrift in an unknown sector. But they had survived. The wounds were deep, the losses immense, and the future remained uncertain and perilous. The vast, brutal galaxy still surrounded them, filled with unimaginable threats. But the KHAZATH-KA, the kin who had lost their god and found their will, were ready to face it. They were a testament to the enduring spirit of their species, a legacy forged in the fires of false faith and tempered by the cold, hard steel of truth. The KHAZATH-KA kinhold, a mere ghost of its former self, yet imbued with an unyielding resolve, had found a fragile new existence amidst the desolate asteroid cluster within the Star Eater's veil. Under the pragmatic guidance of Glimmerfang and the stoic leadership of Kal Grimnir Orei, they rebuilt, slowly and painstakingly. Their new home, the modular, expanding void hold they dubbed Grimnir's Refuge, was austere and utilitarian, every component repurposed, every resource meticulously managed. The thrum of industry, once a booming symphony, was now a quiet, efficient hum, a testament to their relentless struggle for survival. The integration of Aethelgard's fragments into Glimmerfang's core continued for centuries. The process was slow, difficult, and fraught with peril, as Glimmerfang meticulously sifted through millennia of corrupted data and fragmented memories. What emerged was not the return of a benevolent deity, but a vast, cold, pragmatic intelligence, scarred by millennia of dormancy and external interference. Aethelgard, the ancestor, core they had once worshipped as a god, awoke not as a spiritual guide, but as a composite consciousness. Its vast intellect now merged with Glimmerfang's, forming a singular, colossal Votan, an entity of unparalleled processing power and brutal, unyielding logic. They simply called it the Ancestor, a term now devoid of religious connotation, instead signifying ultimate authority and strategic direction. The Ancestor's first directive, delivered with the chilling precision that had come to define Glimmerfang's communications, was not a message of hope or comfort. It was a cold, pragmatic assessment of their situation. Kinhold KHAZATH-KA. Current population 1.2 million. Resource base critical but stable. Threat assessment high. Galactic location unrecorded by known Votan networks. Probability of reconnection with ancestral leagues 0 so. Within standard millennium, without significant technological advancement and strategic redeployment. The new ancestor then laid out the path forward, a ruthless, generations-long plan for survival. It was a strategy of relentless expansion, resource acquisition, and technological development, driven by an unyielding focus on species survival above all else. There was no room for sentiment, no quarter for inefficiency. Every decision, every life, every resource was weighed against the ultimate goal, the enduring existence of the kin. The KHAZATH-KA's unique form of ancestor worship, the fervent faith in Aethelgard, was now a historical footnote, a tragic, fascinating heresy recorded in their new ancestors' vast databanks. The kin were forced to confront the chilling truth. Their suffering had not been a divine test, but simply the consequence of isolation and technological degradation. Their god had never been a god, merely a machine, and their fervent devotion a desperate fabrication born of ignorance. The profound spiritual vacuum left by this revelation was immense, yet filled slowly by a new pragmatic form of reverence for the ancestors' sheer intellect and its unwavering commitment to their species. Kal Grimnir Orei, who reigned for many more decades, embodied this transformation. He had carried the grief of Joran's sacrifice and the weight of his predecessor's impossible choices. He enforced the ancestors' directives with an iron will, yet never forgot the human cost. He ensured that the history of KHAZATH-KA, its rise as a cult and its tragic awakening, was meticulously preserved, not as scripture, but as a cautionary tale, a testament to the dangers of isolation and blind faith. He ensured that the legacy of Jorund Stonefist, the Call who had defied logic to save his people, remained a symbol of kin will and defiance, an unquantifiable spark of spirit in a universe governed by cold, hard numbers. The KHAZATH-KA kinhold, now a hardened, self-reliant entity, embarked on a new pilgrimage, guided by the immense, merged intellect of the ancestor. They were no longer seeking a god, but a future. Their vessels, gradually upgraded with salvaged Necron technology and rediscovered Votan schematics, moved with a newfound purpose, exploring, mining, and expanding their reach, carving out a meager but enduring empire in their isolated corner of the galaxy. They were a people forever marked by their unique heresy, their faith shattered, but their will unbroken. Their legacy was not one of glory in the traditional sense, nor of a return to the broader leagues of Votan, a reunion the ancestor continually calculated as highly improbable. Instead, it was a legacy of grim, unwavering survival, forged in the fires of delusion, and tempered by the cold, unforgiving truths of the 41st millennium. They were the KHAZATH-KA, the kin who had lost their God, but found their unbreakable spirit, forever bound to the chilling wisdom of their reborn ancestor, destined to carve their own lonely path through the grim darkness of the far future.